But yet, I know so many people, especially men, don't even think about the fact that they're not seeing women's sports. They don't like women's sports. They just don't even, put anything like that together. And I know there's the Women's Sports Foundation. You have a lot more female athletes, but our paper, even in this area, after high school and college, is terrible with women's professional sports, terrible coverage. So do you see anything improving in that? Because I certainly don't see anything, obviously, in the major sports media addressing that.
That's a great question. There's a book that is worth reading. I'm going to get the title slightly wrong. It's one of the all-time great titles in the history of books. If that's not too much hyperbole. I'm sorry, I write about sports, so I traffic in these kinds of phrases. But it's called The More Power Women Have, the More Men Love Football. And it's a study about the way that men's sports become more dominant, the more women have a say and a place in society. And undoubtedly, at the top echelons of society, I mean, just in terms of basic issues like political representation, you see a trend where women have more power. And with that, in the sports world, you see a situation, and I mean at the top, to be very clear, that's not a comment about sexism, that's not a comment about the attacks on Planned Parenthood or any actual representations of women having power, particularly working class and poor women, women of color. But it's just the idea of women being in the media, women having a voice, means that men's sports become accentuated with an almost panic type level at the expense of women's sports. And I think those trends are actually, as the sociologists show, are actually getting worse. And it's like the more women even are playing sports, the less it's covered at the top level, which is another paradox. And what it speaks to, I think, is several things. One is what I just described a second ago about just like the sort of panicked, like men holding on to sports. But it also speaks to just male control of the sports industry. I mean, ESPN is terrible about covering women's sports, and they were getting a lot of heat for it. So one of the things they did is they announced that they're going to start a new website called ESPNW, which may spin off into a channel. ESPN Women is what ESPNW means. Now, on the one hand, that can sound very clever and good, but what it also does is it ghettoizes women's sports and makes it seem like it's something separate, which I think plays into all these ideas about gender binaries, like women have to play on one team and men have to play on the other, which are constructed and which are largely bullshit. I mean, when sports started, organized sports started, they actually had to fight to put women and men apart, or girls and boys, I should say, apart. Because everything from slave plantations to fields to farm communities, people played sports and boys and girls played together. The idea of separating genders was something that was imposed. And so, and I think like sports coverage should be something where it's all together. And there's equal coverage, but when you make it separate coverage, it becomes, of course, as we've learned in this society, separate and very unequal. And also, by the way, ESPNW, I've known some sports sociologists, women's sports sociologists who are brought in to discuss it and discuss the forming of it and how it should exist and what programming should exist. And the fear of even like the slightest discussion about lesbian athletes or transgender athletes. I mean, it's so intense, like not even a discussion, not even a workshop. They did this whole weekend of workshops talking about what ESPNW would look like, brought in academics, this, that, the other, would not even truck a conversation about sexuality. And the CEO of ESPNW, she said a quote to the New York Times about 6 months ago, which could have been one of those bicycle face quotes, honestly, where she said, we want ESPNW for the woman who wants to play sports on Saturday and get her pedicure on Sunday. And it's just like, wow, okay, that's your soundbite, huh? And with that, get the pedicure. I mean, there are all these like sort of hidden messages. What does the pedicure mean? It means not butch. It means straight. It means obviously privileged, that you have the time and money to do such a thing. And so there's a way even that it gets marketed that it reflects just all the worst ideas. The best thing that women's sports has going for it, though, actually, is that it's good sports. And that's I think the hope, and that's why it's important to spread the word about this. There's not a person on this planet who saw the NCAA men's basketball final and the NCAA women's basketball final and didn't walk away saying that the women's game was by far the more entertaining, the more competitive, the more fundamentally sound, and the more interesting contest of the two. I mean, it was so obvious and so evident. And you had some snarky sports broadcaster tweeters who then put out things that said, well, it's official. Like, men's basketball is now so bad, the women are better. And so that was their conclusion. But even with that kind of begrudging, sexist swill, it was an admission that the women's game is actually worth watching and enjoying.